Hello, I'm Sean Owens, and this is the oral defense for DET 610, Week 12, final paper on the threat related to Operation Anti-Security. So what is Operation Anti-Security? How we define them actually determines the level of threat. So is Operation Anti-Security one of the most serious cyber threats to national security and safety as defined by some in the United States government? Or is that hyperbole, and there's simply electronic civil disobedience fighting against the corruption and injustice, as some of the academic world would argue? This concept of social activism, or hacktivism in this case, is the context that poses so much debate, particularly related to the prescriptions and the amount and type of force that is appropriate to address the threat of Operation Anti-Security when that cyber threat is based on social injustices versus crime or destruction. So in our argument, Operation Anti-Security actually represents the possibility of being both. And I think they answer the question themselves in their own words. On one hand, they say they stand against corruption and injustice and stand on the behalf of the people. At the same time, they go out and recruit new members by saying they intend to hack government information and deface internet enemies. That they intend to open fire on any government agency that crosses their path. Therefore, if they have to be both, or have the potential to be both, then we have to address the threat that they present. So who is Operation Anti-Security? The members of LulzSec for one. And LulzSec were known for their attacks on Sony, Nintendo, News Corporation, the public-facing sites of the CIA and the U.S. Senate websites. They're also made up of members of Anonymous. Anonymous is probably one of the most well-known and far-reaching hacker groups operating today. They've known attacks against a number of government agencies, law enforcement departments, the Church of Scientology, and many numerous corporations as well. And what makes Operation Anti-Security unique is that it's an open philosophy or movement. They open their membership to anyone that has the same values. This is best expressed by one member that tweeted that you can't shut down an idea regardless of what member that you arrest. So a movement versus a collection of hackers. So without centralized leadership or location, it's more difficult to shut down and prosecute. So how do they choose their targets and how do they strike? So there have been attacks on or hacks on individuals where personal information has been compromised and published. However, Operation Anti-Security generally targets governments and agencies in which they deem are violating the liberties of the public or the private sector companies that have attempted to legal action against hackers, or specifically their members. The governments that have arrested their members or have internet policies in which the operation deems oppressive are also primary targets, while companies and organizations in which the members of Operation Anti-Security find themselves at odds with disclosure policies typically find themselves victim of attacks as well. So the method of attack, standard method of attack, is usually it includes a distributed denial of service attack or DDoS attack. These types of attacks attempt to make computer networks or websites unavailable for their intended users. In addition to these DDoS attacks, Operation Anti-Security has been known to utilize web defacement and the publishing of private data or communications, usually in conjunction or trying to emphasize their objectives. Some notable targets, as we mentioned, have been government agencies, the CIA, the Senate, military, web pages, local law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and privately held corporations. So when we look at what the threat is to the United States and how we quantify that threat, we look at four different ways, four different potential targets. First, we have government intelligence agencies. Leaking of information, policies, and data is the primary threat or concern. We have the military, where the concern would be around the inability to communicate or operate. Now, this becomes particularly serious when cyber attacks precede traditional kinetic attacks. The inability to communicate could mean or could become an inability to defend. Public safety becomes a target or a potential threat to the United States. The Department of Transportation or other critical infrastructure components or agencies that could affect public safety could be targeted. and there's private corporations where the sheer cost of attacks and defenses reaches into the billions of dollars each year. So what is the current United States policy related to Operation Anti-Security? Well, it's headed by the Department of Homeland Security, and the intent is for the Department of Homeland Security to lead efforts of countering cyber threats and to keep federal civilian networks secure. So while protecting the critical cyber infrastructure from hacker groups such as Operation Anti-Security, the identified process is that the Cybersecurity Division partners with private sectors to educate and empower the public to create safe and secure and resilient cyber environments while promoting security knowledge and innovation. Under the government's overall computer strategy, the Department of Homeland Security is responsible for protecting federal governments and civilian domains, as well as working with the industry on cybersecurity efforts. The problem with this is that we're focusing on known vulnerabilities and trying to identify the next zero-day hack. This is a reactive, not proactive approach and offers very little deterrence as well. Results are not immediate in this type of strategy. It takes a long time to work with local law enforcement and sometimes international law enforcement to track down and make arrests and then to prosecute members. And again, the focus is on stopping the threat as it's occurring versus preventing the attacks from happening in the first place or deterring them and the people that would commit these acts. A counter-policy option to the reactive nature of the Cybersecurity Division's tactics would be to effectively use a more proactive methodology, which is referred to as active network defenses. Those prescribing an active network defense policy believe it will increase overall effectiveness of cyber defenses, as well as act as a deterrent to hackers. They will not want to face the counterattack. Active defenses utilize technological capabilities to perform countermeasures designed to strike attacking computer systems and shut down the attacks in process. The counterattacks effectively hack the hackers by introducing a virus back into the offending computers. This prescription of active defenses is very prominent in the academic world, where the argument is not so much whether or not it's effective, that part is assumed, but rather is it ethical, particularly in cases such as Operation Anti-Security, where the attacks might be more social in nature versus criminal. So when looking for ways to improve the United States cyber defense policy, it's important to look at how other countries are addressing similar threats. In this case, we'll review the policies in the state of cyber defenses in Russia. And we do so because they have a very large and sophisticated base. They have a number of hackers, some state-sponsored, which cause some issues that we'll look at as well. They have one of the highest densities of cybercrime, which becomes a focus or a priority of the Russian government, perhaps more so than trying to stop hacks. It's also, Russia provides us with examples where cyber attacks have been utilized in conjunction with kinetic attacks, both in the cases of Georgia and Estonia. So understanding the state of Russia's cyber policies, it has an impact on the United States policies because of an important aspect of Russian cyber policy, especially related to Operation Anti-Security, is the specific and intentional inclusion of a law that forbids any non-governmental operator from releasing data to an authority, a foreign state, or a person or entity of a foreign state. So essentially this prohibits any non-government agency or individual from providing data or cooperation with a foreign investigation related to cyber crimes. So we've created a safe haven for Operation Anti-Security to operate, and mostly this is done by Russia as they're trying to protect their own interest, particularly the use of cyber related to kinetic and military attacks. Again, there's a different priority within Russia, focusing on cybercrime and then their own use of cyber, as opposed to stopping the threat or mitigating the risk of Operation Anti-Security. So when we start looking at possible policies prescriptions for the United States to implement that could help reduce the threat or mitigate the risk related to Operation Anti-Security, we begin with addressing the corruption and social injustices. So if we eliminate the targets, then there's less of a notion that Operation Anti-Security is the only means left of addressing these injustices via hacks or cyber attacks. Now, this certainly won't address the cyber threat in its entirety, but it does take away some of the underlying reasons why Operation Anti-Security even exists in the first place, and it certainly reduces potential targets. Second one is to look at that not everything that can be connected to a network should be. And technology has afforded the ability to connect many devices and to operationalize and automate many processes that were traditionally required human oversight and intervention. In a rush to capitalize on the efficiencies gained via connectivity options, we've created risk by putting these items on networks. So there's not a huge penetration to be made here, but it could go a long way to protecting public safety. Just a simple matter of evaluating items before we put them on networks and automate processes, weigh that versus the risk introduced by making them vulnerable to potential cyber attacks. Step 3, or policy prescription 3, would be international laws and norms in treating denial of service attacks more like biological attacks. The most common problem related to denial of service attacks is determining if the domain that's presenting the attack is truly representative of the offending party. Are they the guilty ones, or are they simply being used by the guilty party? In this particular prescription, it suggests that we don't care if the offending domain is the one committing the attack, or if they're allowing it, or enabling it, or even capable of stopping it on their own. If the attack is coming from their domain, then the attackee has the right to strike back and end that threat. This adds possible deterrence. It also motivates domain owners to protect their own domain so they can't be utilized for nefarious reasons. And finally, we look at the use of active network defenses. If hackers understand that their potential targets have the capability and determination to use active network defenses in response to an attack, they might reconsider. If the originating attack was meant to be a form of protest or social commentary, perhaps alternative methods of protest will be discovered and implemented that will allow for the positive social impact of political activism without the possibility or concerns that hacks could become dangerous or even threaten lives. So by applying these prescriptions, the United States can not only mitigate and deter cyber risk from hacktivists such as Operation Anti-Security, but also from cyber criminals and terrorists. The potential to reduce corruption and improve overall security is an ancillary benefit to society that shouldn't be discounted. United States policy related to cyber attacks has had some successes, but it does need to evolve and move forward in order to be more effective.